At the moment, there's about 25 million tonnes of non-recyclable waste in the UK. The society is growing. If we don't do something about it, that's going to get to 30 million tonnes. The government's given a clear target with all its recycling and repurposing policies that target should get back to 17 million tonnes by the mid-2040s.
Welcome to the Carbonsations podcast, where we speak to some of the leading figures in the emerging carbon industry. Joining us for this episode of the show is Mike Maudsley, CEO of the UK's leading waste-to-energy operators, Infinium, which is also the first of its kind to start using carbon capture in the country. Mike, thank you so much for making the time to be on the podcast. If you're familiar with the format, you'll know that we like to get a better understanding of our guest's background before diving straight into the carbon side of things. So with that said, it would be great if you could tell us a little bit more about what you used to do before Infinium and how you entered the waste-to-energy sector.
Thanks, Violet. And very happy to be here today. Thanks for inviting me. Yeah, as you mentioned, I'm Mike Maudsley, CEO of Infinium. I've only been in the waste sector for 2 years. My whole career, 30 years of my career, has been in the energy sector. And I don't class the waste sector as the energy sector. It's a very unique sector, as the waste sector. So 30 years in power station development, power station construction, power station operations, and the trading of the power as well, and the whole commodity. So I've got a very, very good experience in that sector, and in all fuels and commodities in that area too. So from coal-fired power stations that ultimately in the UK have expired out to be replaced by gas, which is the first part of the emissions move and the drive to reduce CO2 and other emissions in the atmosphere. And so I'm very versed in the power sector of how the world changed. And then I've run a lot of gas-fired power stations, been in the Middle East and desalination as well. And then practically I came back and I've done a lot of work with pump storage power stations, and hydro, and I've also done wind and solar. So I've had a good selection of power. And then I got this great opportunity to join the waste sector. Now, the waste sector isn't that as interesting to the power sector because actually it doesn't produce a lot of electricity, but that's not the point. The point of energy from waste is actually to manage the societal issue, which is managing non-recyclable waste that's gone through every part of its recycling process and ultimately only has three options. One is to put into landfill, which we don't want because that can create larger and more toxic emissions from methane, or we could export the problem abroad, or we can actually put it into energy from waste plants, process that, and then ultimately we do create electricity, which is good.
How much waste does Infinium process at the moment?
Infinium, we process at the moment up to 2.3 million tonnes of non-recyclable waste a year. That's about 13% of the UK's non-recyclable waste sector. And ultimately, we're building two new plants, another £1 billion of investment in new technologies, new energy from waste. So we'll be processing over 3 million tonnes of non-recyclable waste on an annual basis. Ultimately, what I've done now is to come from the power sector, join the waste sector, and really look at it in a different way. Rather than looking at the sector as what do we do with this waste, it's what do I do with this energy? The waste sector's primary objective is to manage the waste. Number one is we don't want waste in the first place, so reduce it to start with. That's very important and very important to Infinium. I'm not here, I don't believe Infinium is here as a business to just create energy from waste from society. It's just to manage what society can't do with that waste. So number one is reduce it. Number two then is to repurpose it, try and recycle it, and reuse it in any other way you can before you get to the point where there is that bit left where we have to manage. And by about 2040, the government, with all its trials and focus areas and policies that will come in, will drive down more, or will drive out more waste in terms of we want more recycling, so the government policies will come in. But we still have about 17 million tonnes to process, even in the 2040s. So I see joining this sector is that I've got a great job. I'm sure we're going to come on to it, of how we can do even more with the energy that we are producing.
Excellent. Now, As I mentioned in the intro, Infinium is a pioneer in this sector in that you've announced the first carbon capture unit for this industry in the UK. This project is something you're doing together with Hitachi's Ocean Innova, HCI, who will provide the technology for it. And I'd love it if you could share some details about the project itself, such as capacity, how far along it is, and really anything else you can share with us about the partnership with HCI.
I will just step back slightly and talk about carbon capture for energy and waste to start with, because, why are we doing it in the first place? Well, as I said, there's 17 million tons of non-recyclable waste that will be here in the future. Of that tonnage, every ton of waste produces 1 ton of CO2. So and from that process is that 50% at the moment, the way that it's recycled, 50% of that is a fossil part of carbon. So it's got plastics in it. And that adds to the CO2 in the atmosphere, which we don't want. And then there's the other part of CO2, a biogenic part. So where we've got paper, cardboard, food waste that's all mixed together, we can't recycle in any other way. That is biogenic. But that still produces CO2. And if you can capture both, you capture 2 birds with 1 stone here. The first is that you stop emitting the CO2, the fossil CO2 into the atmosphere that you don't want. And the other side is that if you capture the whole lot, then you actually create carbon removals from the bio content. So that is ultimately the aim for Enfinium, and we are trying to lead the way in the industry of doing this. And we know that in the market at the moment, the most proven technology is carbon capture with a product called an amine product. And there's still a lot of work to be done with this amine product. We still got to trial it. We still got to see how it degrades, how much energy it uses. Carbon capture isn't for free. It will cost a lot of money. It will consume a lot of energy to capture the CO2. So we've got to understand it more. We've got to tame that animal. I'm an engineer, so I'm quite keen as my team to get a pilot project, as we've done with HDI, and to see what and how this amine behaves. So it's a pioneering way for Enfinium. It's a pioneering way for HDI that haven't produced one of these before. And it's a pioneering way for the UK because we haven't tested flue gas from energy from waste through carbon capture before in the UK. So we will be doing that. We've received the plant last week. It's a containerized unit. It's not large. It will capture about 1 ton of CO2 a day. And we will monitor how the amines, and we'll trial different amines in this process to see what's the best amines that and how they react to the CO2 from energy from waste. Because energy from waste, or the flue gas from energy from waste, is quite complicated in the terms that it's got some chlorine contents in there, it's got some sulfur contents in there, it's got CO2 contents for sure. It's not as homogeneous as a gas-fired power station or a biomass power station. Or even a coal. So we've got to learn. And I'm going to use Enfinium, and we're going to pioneer the way in learning and share that information across not just the UK, but across anybody else that wants to know.
Thank you. And just a quick detail about the project. I understand that this will be a miniature version, this pilot plant. And you said it's going to capture 1 ton of CO2 per day, which to me sounds like a very impressive number. But how should I say, projected amount that you aim for as far as capture capacity goes?
Right. So that's the scaling up. So number one is understand the products and how it works. No energy from waste plants in the world at the moment with any carbon capture, but there are carbon capture plants around the world that could capture 500,000 ton a year. It would be a big plant. Now, Enfinium, our plants are around about the 500,000 to 750,000 tons a year per plant. So we've got to scale up from the 1 ton per day to best part of 500,000 per plant across the fleet. So we need to capture, round numbers, when we've got the other 2 plants running, 3 million tons of CO2 a year. When we capture that, it will need to be stored. And the next part of that process is the UK government is managing 2 clusters at the moment, and it's a bid process to manage these 2 clusters. And we're bidding in to get government funding to connect into a system which the government will also fund a pipeline system and a storage system in one will be in the North Sea on the east coast of UK, and one at the moment in the Irish Sea. But there will be other storage facilities created, and we intend to be part of these clusters. Ferrybridge is my largest plant. It produces between the two plants about 1.3 million tons of CO2 per year. And of that, 750,000 would be carbon removals. That's the point. That's the the utopia aim, the special element of energy from waste going into carbon capture. So we will connect ideally to these systems. Now we will connect in many different ways. Probably the ideal way is by pipeline. If the pipeline can't get to the plants, then we are actually looking at a rail system. So we're looking at liquefying the CO2. Transporting it from the Ferrybridge plant up to the East Coast cluster, and we're working with partnership with one of our sister companies called Navigator, who's a bulk storage terminal in Teesside near Newcastle. And ultimately, between the two of us, we could then not just capture it, but transport it and store it out in the North Sea, or even further up to the Northern Lights, wherever it's best to be stored once we can capture it. So enfinium, if and when we're ready to move forward on the first 4 operational plants, we will need about £1.7 billion of investment to capture the first 2 million tons. And then we'll move out from that to the 2 new plants that are being built as well, which don't come online until 25, 26. And we'll be moving them forward in the mid to early 30s.
Brilliant. I'm glad you mentioned the partnership with Navigator, because I think it's great that you're kind of have this wholesome approach to decarbonizing. Like, it's not just about capturing the emissions, but it's transporting them and figuring out where to store them. I was curious as to whether, since you are kind of building out the infrastructure for this, is there something that other emitters could potentially participate in as well?
Yeah, there's when you look across the UK, there's a lot of emitters, and particularly at the moment in these 2 bid processes for government, there are over 50 emitters that are bidding for project support. So not everybody will win, for sure. But one side of that is the government will set a system up, the storage system from this process, and will set up some pipelines. So in time, it will be a process of how do you commercialize your business solution, your carbon capture solution, to be able to connect into a system which was set up by the government. The idea is that system on both coasts will be set up by 2028, and we will be capturing and moving carbon into storage by then. And from my point of view, we're bidding on the West Coast for a £200 million project. Ideally, we could be online by 28, 29 in that cluster. We haven't been able to bid as yet into the East Cluster. So that's why I'm looking at a train solution that if that cluster, when it gets operational, and if the pipeline hasn't come to Ferrybridge, then I will be looking at a train solution. I've got a southern plant where we could be looking at a shipping system out of the southern plant, and I'm not ruling out barges neither to transport CO2 from middle of the country to the coast. But ultimately, the CO2 has to get to the coast before it can go on to a storage facility.
I also have a question about the Ferrybridge plant. Since I understand that it's more energy efficient compared to other facilities in the sector, could you perhaps share why that is?
It's the largest facility in the UK. 2 plants together process 1.3 million tons, which is the largest facility in the UK. The largest facility in the world is about 1.9 million tons, and that's just being created in Dubai. So we are, extremely big, even specifically for the UK. So because we're big, ultimately from that part of the process, you can actually create more energy from your process. All 4 of our current operational assets, our oldest asset is only 7 years old. So we are built for a long time, 30, 40, 50 years. We're part of a national infrastructure already. And really the future needs to be that the more modern plants like ourselves that have got the best air pollution control systems, the best technologies already, they are the most efficient to retrofit carbon capture plants. You obviously need space to do so, and that's the first point, is really to find that space, which we have, and then look forward of how we can do feed studies, and then how we can transport the CO2.
Fantastic. Mike, I wanted to also get your take on some bigger picture matters, so to speak. And one of them is the National Infrastructure Commission's recent proposal to ban EFW plants that do not have carbon capture and include those that do in the emissions trading scheme. How is this proposal being received in the industry, and what impact do you see it having?
The number one thing is that for the waste sector is very receptive to change and new ideas, so that's a positive. We also see that energy from waste can create a phenomenal solution from being what is currently an emitter of fossil CO2 to be a capture of carbon removals and to create carbon removals. No other industry can do this other than the biomass sector in terms of energy production. So we have a very, very unique place to play here, and that's type of key for us. And we know that we'll always have a residual waste that has to be managed. And the whole industry is very focused on, well, how can we best do that? Moving forward, I think it is important then that the National Infrastructure Commission has 2 points. One is that we really do need to recognise energy from waste as a sector and what it can bring to the net zero solution. On that basis, we need to make sure we have a CO2 pipe network that can capture the CO2 and can transport the CO2 from all captured areas where possible. There are 50 assets currently, 50 energy from waste plants in the UK. And then just to add that up, there's about 500 in Europe, and across the world, there's about 2,500. So if we pioneer the way here, everybody could follow us, and there could be a lot of carbon removals created from energy from waste plants. And that's really why the sector is positive about what we can do, not what we're doing at the moment.
And in that line of thought, how do you believe government policies and regulations can be improved to incentivize waste diversion and maximize the effectiveness of waste energy solutions?
The number one driver that we've got and will be coming in is the ETS, the emissions trading scheme. So this is a carbon trading scheme which was UK was part of the European system, and then it's become part of its independent system. Energy from waste at this point doesn't participate in that market, so therefore we don't pay carbon tax. That will come in 2028. We're going to go through an MRV process from 2026, so we've got to get our act together and going as an industry. It's very important that we do drive this forward. And then once that comes in, really the intent is that the producer of the waste, not the emitter of the CO2, the producer of the waste pays for their carbon imprint. So if I'm throwing away waste plastics into my dustbin, then actually I get carbon tax on that waste that I throw away. That should change behavior to stop people creating the waste in the first place. It should change the behavior to stop throwing away waste before you can use it for other things, repurpose it, use that plastic bag twice, 3 times, 10 times before you eventually have to throw it away. And so the whole ETS program is about changing societal behavior to reduce the waste in the first place, and then ideally for the industry and actually for consumers is we don't want a fossil-derived packaging system. So anything that's got plastic around it actually isn't necessarily good for the planet in the long run as far as throwing it away. So you've either got to package it and then in plastic and reuse it for something else, or don't package it in plastic and put it in some type of biogenic form. And then if it's thrown away because it can't be reused, then it can be put through one of our energy from waste plants with carbon capture, and we can create the carbon removals and really do the best thing for the world, which is taking CO2 out of the atmosphere.
Won't these changes in behaviors essentially shrink the sector?
Yeah, that's the key point, and we've got to be clear that will happen. At the moment, there's about 25 million tons of non-recyclable waste in the UK. The society is growing. If we don't do something about it, that's going to get to 30 million tons. The government's given a clear target with all its recycling and repurposing policies that target should get back to 17 million tons by the mid-2040s. So there will always be some residual waste, but we don't want more. We should drive for less. In driving for less, that means that some plants, the older energy from waste plants, should close. And then as time goes on, when we need to build new ones, we should only be building energy from waste plants with carbon capture on them, and then they should be fit for purpose in the right place at the right time.
So with that said, realistically, how do you see the waste energy sector developing in the coming few years, like leading up to 2030?
So leading up to 2030, the number one part is that we the energy and waste sector are a big player actually at the moment in bidding for projects within the two clusters with the government. So that's number one, is that we should be part of that. We are, if you look at the hierarchy of how carbon capture should be deployed across businesses and sectors, that it's very clear that the energy and waste sector needs to be at the top of the hierarchy, because we need to stop the emission of the fossil CO2, but we can also create the removal portion as well. So we need to have a light shone on us. We need to be classed as in our own sector. We're very unique. Whatever happens, we have to do what we have to do. We can't stop creating, we can't stop creating waste, ultimately, is the point, but we need to manage that waste the best way we can. So the sector will be driving in these two clusters to build carbon capture where we can. Then the other part of the sector, or one thing Infinium is driving for, is how do we commercialize these carbon capture projects without government support? And it will need carbon removal, a carbon removal market. In that market, we, Infinium, will be looking for players out there, for buyers out there who would like to build a long-term relationship with Infinium. We have long-term fuel contracts. We have long-term waste contracts going out 20, 30 years. And so we've got a very, very defined fuel business. We can provide, if we put carbon capture on, very long-term, guaranteed, sustainable carbon removal certificates. And if there are businesses out there that want to be talking to us, I'd recommend that. Please phone us. This is how we will commercialize all the most modern facilities in the UK and around the world, actually. So I want to be first. I want Infinium to be first, and we are looking for commercial partners for carbon removals as part of the way to bring forward a carbon capture program, ideally to build by the mid to late 2020s and get them online early 2030.
Brilliant. That's kind of the perfect segue to my final question before we wrap up. I really wanted to circle back to Infinium and see if there are any exciting upcoming developments or announcements that we should be looking forward to and that you're ready to speak to already.
Well, number one is the best announcement that will be coming in July is we will have our pilot carbon capture plant up and running. Please come and see it. That will be a good one. Come and see what we are doing. Number one. Number two is that we are installing carbon-14 monitors across all our plants, which is an important part of how you measure and have a very clear view of what your biogenic content is in your waste emission. So that's something else we're installing across the fleet this year. We are building 2 new facilities, which will be coming online within the next 18 months. Very excited about that. We're bidding in for the Parc Adfa, which is in North Wales. We want to be the Welsh first energy from waste plant with carbon capture. We want to be Wales's first carbon removal business, and we're bidding for a £200 million project there for the West or the HyNet cluster. So we're keen that we're heard and the government look upon us as a potential for great success. It's quite a small facility there in terms of 200,000 tons of carbon capture that we could deliver. But that's good in a sense, because scaling up will take time. The big plants, if you're talking millions and millions of tons, the big plants are going to take a lot more scaling up. There are a lot more teething problems. Building a carbon capture system with smaller plants to start with up to larger plants, I think is the right thing. So Parc Adfa in North Wales, watch this space. I'm hoping for good government support here and good Welsh government support to get that project running. We could have it up and running by mid-2028.
Excellent. Mike, this was a lovely conversation. I'm really glad to have had you as a guest on the podcast. And thank you so much for sharing with us some of what the waste energy sector looks like from the inside. It was a pleasure.
Thanks, Violet. Thanks for inviting me. And it really is an exciting sector. I've been in it 2.5 years, and I can't believe that I should have been in it earlier. 30 years in the power industry, and now this sector's type of booming. It's fantastic.
Yeah, and it's definitely the prime time, I guess, for this sector.
Thank you very much.
If you enjoyed this episode of the Carbonsations podcast and would like to hear more conversations like this, please be sure to subscribe. We really appreciate the support.